Hi, welcome to Lighthouse Living Room. I'm going to be your host for the next 45 to 50 minutes, and we are going to start down a path of understanding the book and if I would say, the prophecy of Daniel and the book of Revelations. Now, I'm going to do this a little differently than I've ever done it before because most of you that are listening, which I am assuming that you are believers, and if you are, there are certain things that you need to understand. And we've been taught over the course of many years, especially denominationally speaking, and through the Roman Catholic Church and through the Catholic Church, I'll tell you the differentiations between the two, that there are some things that we've been told that are outright false. In fact, to the point where it's almost laughably so false that how could anybody ever believe this? So I'm going to share with you some premise tonight. We're going to lay down a background, if you will, or kind of a overview. I love history. That's one of my strongest points, I guess, in my life, that I just like order. And everything that happens, especially in Bible, happened in order. In other words, there were certain things that took place. We need to understand how did that affect how the Western church, or what we call Western civilization, received the book of Revelation and the book of Daniel. I'm going to explain that in really, I guess probably the best way to say it, monotonish, disciplined way so that you can understand it and you can take it in. This is a lot to grasp. If you have something to write with, I would certainly suggest that you might want to grab that now. And if you have questions, write the questions down so that I can answer them in the future. I'm going to start with, why do we use, and why is this important, I guess? Why do we use the calendar that we use today? Why do we use the term AD, which is after death, BC, before Christ, or BCE, or CE? You may have never heard that, but they're out there. And they're used in the method in which we calculate end times theology. Now, I'll say theology because it is a theory. It is not dyed in the wool, black and white, this is how it's going to be. Simply because of the fact that Jesus said he's going to come back. We understand that, right? Oh, I think we all understand that. In being able to understand the idea of how men, if you will, clergy, put together what they did and why they did that. Now, I'm going to share with you a really, really old book that I have. It's actually leather pages, as we would see paper pages on most books, or cardboard and paper. This is actual real leather. It's real cow's leather. And I'm going to share with you some things that I have found over the course of years of study that brings me to a place of saying that, there's a lot of stuff out there. What's really truthful? So I'm going to begin with a little sheet here, a little short sheet that kind of gives you an overview of the biblical history timeline. Now, why am I saying that? Why is this important? I mean, don't shut me off, because this means a lot to a lot of people. You have no idea how many people believe certain things, like the rapture of the church and the catching away, if you will, of those that are on the planet at a certain time, and that one will be taken, the pilot will be taken from the airplane, and it will crash, and, just frankly, just a bunch of nonsense. What I want to share with you tonight are facts, so that I can take facts, attach them to history, so that we can see where it goes and why it was shaped the way that it was. Now, one of the things that we need to be aware of, and I will get to in just a moment, is a glossary of terms. like Antichrist, like futurism, like eschatology, those kinds of words. We're going to explain what those are. Now, why is this important? It's because it all fits into the narrative of what was trying to be said. And I'm going to tell you the story as I see it of what happened and why it happened. Now, the meaning of AD is Anno Domini, or year of our Lord, referring to the year of Christ's birth. AD, after death, basically. The meaning of BC is before Christ. CE is a recent term, which means common era, A-E-R-A, era. And it's used to place in the place of AD, which is talked about. Because many people are confused about AD, after death. That the calendar started at the death of Christ, which was 33 years after his birth. So why didn't they go back to the birth of Christ and do that? Well, there's reasons for that, and I'll share those with you and show you how confusing it can get. And then it goes on, it refers to common era, and then that's CE. And the dates are the same in like 2009 AD is the same as 2009 CE. In other words, common era. Now, here's the next one, BCE, which is one that is used, if you're a studier of history, you would find this very interesting, only in the fact that what it means. It means before common era. In other words, 400 BC is 400 BCE. So it really means the same thing. Follow what I'm saying? So BC and AD, those two things are pretty consistent. CE and BCE are things that nobody else uses except for a bunch of scholars that want to confuse you. Now, many different calendars have been used since the beginning, that began tracking time. Most start with some epic event or person. For instance, BC and AD, for numbering the calendar years, it was invented by a guy named Dionysius Exgus. What a name, right? In 525 AD, after death. His purpose was to determine the correct date for Easter under the direction of Pope St. John I. Now, prior to this time, one method for determining Easter was based on a 532-year calendar cycle stemming from the Alexandrian era. Other methods were used that led to the confusion, and Dionysius was asked to determine the method of calculating Easter that would be then used by the entire church all the time. Dionysius did not want to perpetuate the name of Alexander, considered the great persecutor. Now, history, if you don't know your history, you're going to be confused by what I'm about to tell you. If you do know your history, then you would understand why this is so important. There was a guy named Alexander the Great who literally conquered the world, all of it, not just just Europe, all of it. He completely decimated everything and everywhere that he went. Now, why is this important? Because at the time of Christ's birth was supposed to have the preceding year of that, Rome was being founded, if you will. And at the time that it's being founded, there's a lot of confusion there. And they wanted the dates to be a certain way so that Rome was kind of preeminent, or it was the controlling factor on how that looked at, how the events of life, calendar in particular, like summer and winter and the breaks and fall and all of that, all of those dates were all put in there, and they should be repeating every year at the same time. This guy, Dionysius, did not like Alexander the Great. In fact, he was very opposed to him. And he wasn't going to give him any credit for what was being done. And so he decided that he was going to change some of this. For example, the first year began in 1 AD and ended the beginning of 2nd AD, so that the first year of the 21st century begins in 2001, 1 year later than 2000. That's kind of how they did this. There's a reason for all of this, and I'll give you that reason in just a moment. that it took all of this craziness that they were doing to skew the calendar to cover something up. Now, what do you think that they would be trying to cover up? Or what were they trying to create an atmosphere that would blur something that was out there? Now, of course, it's a lot of interesting things to be said about that. But now what we have, what we call the Julian calendar, which is the beginning of months and years, continued until 1582. And then the Gregorian calendar came about a year or so after that, which was 365 days long, which is the calendar that we actually follow today. Now, the interesting part of the reason why they did the Gregorian calendar and they changed it around a little bit was that they wanted to cover something that was being said about the Pope. And this is why it's so important to understand history. Martin Luther will be involved in this. Other people will be involved in this. This book that I'm going to share with you today, I'm laying groundwork as we start to go through what I'm talking about and why it is so important. The other thing is that during the course of time that these calendars, AD, BC, and the time setting and when they actually started, we find that the Jewish calendar, the one that Rabbi and I talk about quite often, actually is about 3 to 4 weeks different than the Gregorian calendar. And not in so much in days, but the fact in seasons and feasts and festivals and that type of thing. All of that is very important to the overview of what we're about to talk about. Now, finding some common ground in all of this is the reason why we need to find out why was this so important for the Roman Catholic Church to have control of the calendar. Why was that so important? And why was it so important that the Roman Catholic Church had to have the narrative, in other words, dealing with what people were hearing? Here's some of the reasons. Now, dealing with the last things is what it talks about in Daniel. We're going to talk about a word called eschatology. Now, as I was telling you that there's a glossary that I need to go through and talk to you about. So let's go to eschatology, and we're going to talk about it so that we can understand what I'm about to tell you through the last things. Now, eschatology is doctrines about death and its aftermath, the body of religious doctrines concerning the human soul and its relation to death, judgment, heaven, and hell. Let me take and put this one step further, because eschatology is the study of end times, things that are coming from birth to death, but always ending in death and the end of all things. But it also has something to do with a guy named, well, let's just say, the Antichrist. The opponent of the antagonist of Christ, also a false Christ. In the book of Revelation, Antichrist is identified with paganism. In other words, paganism is the result of the anti-Christ, or anti who Christ is. Now, I've said all of that to say this. When we look at eschatology, the study of end times, what it looks like at the end of the era or the end of the age is what the terms that we will be dealing with when you look at it from that perspective. Follow with me now. It's very interesting because dealing with the last things, the rapture, the second coming, or in the millennium, I think all of you have probably heard of those three things: rapture, second coming, and millennium. Now, in respect to those, rapture does not appear in Scripture, period. Neither Old Testament or New Testament. But the word catching away, being caught up, does. This is the term that they use for rapture and being caught up in regards to chapter 24 and chapter 25 of Matthew, which we just discussed a couple of weeks ago. Now, I want to share with you some things that are very interesting. I have a little cheat sheet here that I've got that I'm going to go over. But why am I talking about that in this way? Because eschatology, if you will, end times, the last things that are going to happen before the end of the age. Jesus is going to come back, and that is the essence of what Revelation and the book of Daniel are actually about his appearing and his coming back. Now, I'm saying all of that to say this. I'm going to give you some views, view being an idea of what they think men, some people, some scholars, think it's going to look like at the end of the age. In other words, what is it going to look like when Jesus comes back? Now, I want to throw this out there so that you understand. I'm going to share with you 8 pieces of information, 8 different viewpoints of what end times are going to look like. And I'm going to ask you this question at the end of when we do this. All of you have been taught something different, from the Roman Catholic side to the Episcopalian to Presbyterian to, Baptist, Pentecostal, to whatever, myriads of different theologies. Now, why I say that is that you need to understand that if there's 8 ideas men have given you, there's only going to be one way in which Jesus is going to return. You follow? So 7 of these, or maybe all 8 of them, will be incorrect. But this is what people believe. And so for us to be able to wrap our head around what we're trying to understand in the book of Revelations and Daniel, you need to understand what these things are or what they look like. I have a chart that's about 4.5 feet, maybe 5 feet long, this tall in full color, which takes us through dates and times throughout all of the known world. And from beginning until now, talking about creation, Noah, the flood, Babylon, all of the other things, all the way through until the second coming of Christ. It has a certain viewpoint. I'll share that with you probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks, because right now it would be just too overwhelming. But here I want to share with you something that I think is very interesting. I'm going to talk about these 8 views in the idea of what they were for, because I'm going to shock you at the end with what I'm going to share with you. Now, here is what they call the premillennial, pre-tribulation. In other words, a millennium is 1,000 years, right? So pre-1,000 years and pre-tribulation. Tribulation is the period that many of the teachers, the faith movement teachers, teach you that will take place in a very short period of time. There's some say 7 years, some say 3.5 years, some say this, that, and the other. And I'll explain some of that to you in greater detail. But this is the first of the group that we're going to look at tonight. I don't want to bore you with this, so I'm going to go through this kind of quickly. So if you have a question about it, write it down and bring it to me Sunday or email me, and I'll be happy to try to follow up on it. Now, all believers are raptured before the Great Tribulation. The rapture and the second coming are separate events. So the rapture, so people will be taken out of the earth, and then the second coming will come, Jesus will come. But it won't be until people are taken out. Secret rapture, or catching away, all right? Now, tribulation and the millennium are literal 7-year and 1,000-year periods. Tribulation being 3.5 years of peace, 3.5 years of turmoil. And then a 1,000-year period in which one front end or back end, this happens to be pre, so it would be before the coming of the Lord. Israel and the church are separate programs. We find this rapture theology in 1 Thessalonians 4, 15 and 16, if you want to write that down. The church will be in heaven, 7-year tribulation on earth begins. Then the second coming, which is 2 Thessalonians 2, 8, according to them, and earthly millennial kingdom followed by eternity that is shared in Revelations chapter 20, verses 1 through 6. That is premillennial, pre-tribulation. Now I'm going slow so that if you're writing, I don't want to run by you. Now here's another one. This is premillennial, but post-tribulation. In other words, after. All believers are raptured at the end of the Great Tribulation. In other words, that 7-year time. They're all pulled off the planet, and the second coming are the same event. So the rapture takes place and the second event at the same time. That's what it talks about in 1 Thessalonians 4:15 and 18. It said, those that are alive and remain will be caught up in the air and be gathered together, as we talked about just several weeks ago about 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. Now, this is another view. The earthly millennial kingdom followed by eternity, la, la, la. Then there's premillennial and mid-tribulation. In other words, 3.5 years of peace take place in this tribulation period, and then boom, we're all raptured out of here, and the 3.5 years of wrath happen while we're gone, and the earth is in turmoil, and apparently somebody comes and preaches and all this other stuff. They believe that raptures after 42 months, 1,260 days of the 7-year Great Tribulation, this all takes place. That's 3. We got more to go. 4. Premillennial, pre-tribulation, partial rapture view. This is unbelievable. Partial rapture, in other words, Matthew 25, 1 through 13, which means one will be taken and one will be left, one, etc. If you haven't read it, you can get it. Matthew 25, 1 through 13. This happens. Spiritual Christians are in heaven. People who do not, Lord, are down here getting a second chance because the 2 prophets are going to speak to them and there's going to be a revival, which I find hard to believe that could happen because the Holy Spirit will be pulled out of there at the same time. So that's probably not an accurate view. It's just me talking. Second coming, earthly kingdom followed by eternity. Again, chapter 20 of Revelations, 1 through 6. Then we have the next one. This is number 4. The premillennial, pre-wrath rapture view. This one gets really, really crazy. They believe that the 3.5 years are broken up in different spots. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, the 3.5 years or 7 years of tribulation, it's talked about in Daniel. 1,260 days and the 7 years and all this stuff all come together in a very interesting way. However, again, I have a real problem with it. And then we have another one, the evangelical post-millennial view, which the tribulation is an age long, not 7 years. It's a literal 1,000-year reign of Christ. Where, I'm not sure. Here on the planet, I don't know. I just know that when he comes back, he ain't going to be ruling and reigning on the one that we're on now because it's going to get burned up. It's going to be a new heavens and new earth, just saying. And so that creates another problem, if you follow what I'm saying. So all of that being said, Israel and the church and the people of God and all of this stuff going on. This takes us to the last one that I want to share with you tonight because I'm going to tell you why this is important. St. Augustine's amillennial view. Now, the book of Revelations is believed to be a symbolic book of kingdoms triumphing through the church. The Great Tribulation and Millennium are not 7 years and 1,000-year periods, but are symbolic terms for the age-long struggle of evil against Christ's rule on the planet right now. Second coming is 2 Thessalonians 2:8. Rapture is 1 Thessalonians 4:15. Talking about that, somewhere in there, eternity starts, and it just, to me, is another mind-boggler. Here's another one. The second amillennial view. This is talking about the same as St. Augustine's that I just talked about, but it's functioning through the church age, and it's talking about the same kind of things, again, breaking all of this stuff up. I said all of that to say this. This is confusing, right? To me, it's incredibly confusing. And the reason why it's confusing, it was done for a reason. I'm going to share with you a guy named Rabbi. Rabbi was a priest in the Roman Catholic Church. One of the reasons why, and I'm going to give you an overview and we'll begin to study it here in a moment, but the point that I want to share with you is very interesting. I have a book in front of me that is the 12th, I believe it's the 11th edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica. As you can see, it is gold leaf, leather bound, had to be taped because of the bindings were coming apart. I inherited this from the pastor that I studied under here at the Lighthouse. He was an amillennialist, which means basically that he believed that the 1,000-year reign, the 1,000 years of tribulation or millennial theology is already happening, and it's kind of clear. Anyway, to make a long story short, another confusing view in my position. Why would you do this? Why would this be such a big deal? So I'm talking about a guy named Rabbi, right? Well, Rabbi was a priest in the Catholic Church. Martin Luther caused a real problem when he declared in his 95 Theses, we'll talk about that, I'll explain that to you, what it looks like. In his 95 Theses that he put on the door front of the church in Germany, of which when he put the 95 reasons why the Pope was the Antichrist, he's the founder of and birthed what we know now as modern Lutheranism, and there are two forms of that. There's Missouri Synod, Lutherans, and then there's Evangelical Lutherans. The Evangelical Lutherans believe strongly in the moving of the gifts and operating something similar to what we do here at the Lighthouse. On the other hand, the Missouri Synod are very formal and very liturgic, which means basically they follow ritual. And it's a very fascinating thing. I am from, and it was birthed out of, Missouri Synod. My cousin, who ministered for years and years and years in the state of Michigan, was an evangelical Lutheran, large church, 15,000, big following, really great guy. You can look him up today. His name's Steve Dornbusch. But my point that I'm making is this. Why did this happen? What did Rabbi try to do to create an atmosphere that would point all of the attention away from the Pope and onto something else? What he did, and this is why this is so fascinating, if you understand history, that Rabbi began to put together what a term, and this term, we'll call it futurism. Futurism. In other words, the things that are going on would be in the future, and it would be something that hasn't happened yet. To take your eyes off of the fact that the millennium, or the 1,000 years of Christ's reign, or whatever and however you want to look at it, didn't begin on the other side of his second coming, that it happened before, and then it got real ugly there in the middle of the 7 years of tribulation, which I believe that we're in right now in many ways. It probably doesn't fit with my theology on end times, but the fact is that it's sure interesting that I don't think I have ever seen anything like what we are seeing today in America or in the world in regards to the persecution of Christians. I thought Fox's Book of Martyrs, if you don't know what that is a book about all of the martyrs that happened during the Roman Empire, in which they were drawn asunder, they were cut in half, they were run over, they were used as fodder and fighting in the middle of the Colosseum on a day-to-day basis. They would round Christians up to kill them, and he did it on a day-to-day basis. It wasn't like what ISIS was doing over the last 10 years, where they were taking Christians outside and telling them to basically recant their Christianity, or they were going to cut their heads off in front of their family. And then they do the same to the rest of the family, because of that the patriarch, or the man in the family, declared that he was a Christian and he could not deny Christ, and so they will lop off his head. Or they put him in a cage and they would burn them, literally put gas on them and burn them, and then they would put it on video on these horrible views, and then people would watch people burn to death. I mean, just incredible. So what was Rabbi trying to do? Rabbi wrote a book of what we know now as futurism. And futurism, and it's in my glossary that I'm going to talk about. Now, how do we know that this happened? Well, the 11th edition of this Encyclopedia Britannica has a huge section on the Roman Catholic Church. I swear, I got it right here. I mean, I'm not talking metaphorically, or I saw this once in a museum. I have it in my hand. This literature goes through and talks about the things I'm going to share with you in regards to what Rabbi in 1584, I think it was, tried to cover for the Pope so that no one would think he was the Antichrist. Huh, isn't that weird? And so why I'm saying that and saying that to you tonight is that we are going to take a look at what happened. Now, why is this important in regards to history? Remember that guy I was just talking about, Alexander the Great? He's a guy that went through every country in the world, literally, and everywhere that the Catholic Church, or what we don't know as the Roman Catholic Church yet, it was the Catholic Church at that time, had a pope in every country. There were, I have to laugh because I remember teaching this, there were little poops, not little popes, but I'm just saying. There were little popes in all of these different countries. Now, this may offend some of you if you're Catholic in background, but the fact is this is what happened. This is history. It's factual. I mean, we can look it up. Alexander the Great decided that he had a real challenge with the fact that these guys had so much power in each country. Now, why was that important? Because it says in the book of Revelation, they said that the Antichrist would have power over the nations in ways that were just beyond belief. For instance, you could not be married in that country if you were any kind of in high standing of any kind without having the Pope let you kiss his ring and you pay to be able to get married in the hierarchy so that you can maintain your position. You could not be given in marriage, you could not receive in marriage, you could not give away land, and you could not purchase land unless you got the Pope's, basically, hey, that's okay, man, come see me, what's in it for me? And you pay him a little bit of money. This is why we see some very interesting things in when Martin Luther went to the church in Germany with the 95 Thesis, is that paying to get your loved ones out of perdition or out of purgatory, paying a priest to pray them out so that they wouldn't go to hell, they would go to heaven, was something that he was one of the 95 Theses that he put out there, stating that this wasn't right and that the Pope is the Antichrist. That's all in there. You can read it for yourself. I mean, good grief. Don't take it from me. Just because I say something doesn't mean it's truth. You need to make sure that it is. But what I'm saying is that all about what I'm talking about is right here in the 11th edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica. That was the go-to. I don't know how many studies and how many things I did going through high school and going through college that I took directly out of the books of the Encyclopedia Britannica. However, what happened next will get your goat. You remember and there was a group that were called the Jesuits. The Jesuits. What were they? Who were they? They were a group of people who were sanctioned by the priest to do the dirty work for the Pope. Now, in every country, there were Jesuits, secret police, secret society, incredibly effective at what they did. If you remember I can't remember the guys with Tom Hanks when he was doing all of the study in Rome about all of the different things. That was exactly what he was talking about. And the person he was chasing was a Jesuit. And he was doing the work of what a bishop told him to do, to kill certain people and to get these documents so that this guy could be elevated to be the Pope. It's just fascinating. But you know what happened? When the next year, the Encyclopedia Britannica 12th edition came out, the section that I just showed you isn't in there. In fact, you can't find anything that pertains negatively to the Roman Catholic Church in the 12th edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Why? Because they bought it. Lock, stock, and barrel. The Vatican bought it. Scrubbed it of everything that was determined to be derogatory towards the Pope or towards the Roman Catholic Church, and they turned it into a propaganda piece, for lack of a better term, to tell you how great they were and how terrific they were. Because we're going to be talking about something that a lot of people don't even understand. They were talking about the bull of the church in the 1700s. We're talking about the the Jesuits here being talked about, the new monarchies that were positioned. It's laid out in here as clear as I've ever seen it, talking about the Inquisition and all of the other things that were happening at that time to cause all that. So what did Alexander the Great do? Well, Alexander the Great was a good guy. He believed in religious freedom, if you want to call it that. And he took all of the popes from all of the different countries and he rounded them all up, brought them all into a big room. And they all had their insignet rings on their fingers. And he had them come up one at a time, and he cut the ring with the finger with the ring, off of each hand and put it in a bag. I am not kidding you. This is just what happened. Put it all in a bag, zipped the bag up, took all of these guys, and he put them all together. And he said, you figure out who wants to lead you, because you know where you're going? You're going to Rome. We're going to put you over the flanks. Revelation chapter 19, I believe it is, it says that he said that where the Vatican sits now is on 7 hills. And the fascinating part of it is that it's talked about in Revelation as a prophecy of what would take place when the Roman Catholic Church was birthed, if you will, and one pope by a group of a certain amount of men, bishops, if you will, come together and they vote on. Isn't that interesting? Because he said, here's the bag of all the rings that you have. Only one of you are going to be able to rule. Figure out who it is. And so that's what they did. That's how that worked. That's where that came from. Alexander the Great was demonstratively involved in dealing with that. Fascinating stuff. So let's go to this glossary real quick and understand some of the things that were going on. So Rabbi was trying to cover up what was said by Martin Luther. He didn't want it to get out there. So what he did is he wrote this fantastic futurism theology, pre, post, mid-trib, all that stuff, and he threw it out there, and it died. In other words, it didn't get any traction. It was stuffed away in Oxford in the UK, in the big library there. Big, huge, monstrous library, thousands of volumes. We were in Ireland a couple of years ago, and we went through one of the largest libraries on the continent there. The second largest. The Oxford one is bigger. This one in Dublin was a pretty good size, but it was an amazing place. And book upon book on book. Books sold so old that you had to ask for a request to see the book, and it would be brought to you in gloves. It would be open to the pages you wanted to read, and you had to wear gloves to look at it. You could not touch it. And then they would come and retrieve the book and put it back at the end of the day. And if you want to look at it again the next day, you have to ask permission, and they would bring it back out, and they would show it to you. And some books, unless you're somebody of some special high stature, you couldn't even see them. But this manuscript Rabbi did was stuffed in Oxford. And some guy named Schofield found it. And he began to preach the message of the rapture all over North America on the East Coast. And it became what we know now as the futurist doctrine, which has morphed into all of these different viewpoints, each denomination taking on its own, each of them looking at it from a different perspective. I'm just telling you that it's very interesting to me that all of that took place after Martin Luther declared that the Pope was the Antichrist. Now, am I saying he's the Antichrist? I'm not saying anything. I'm just telling you this is what the truth is. You have to make up your own mind. So let's go through the glossary of terms. and as we only have about 10 minutes left, and then we're going to start going down each of these different thought processes, so I explain them. I think I can do that in 10 minutes. Let's take a look at what it says. Now, let's start with first one I mentioned last, Antichrist. He's the opponent or the antagonist of Christ. Would you agree? Is he going to be some giant figure? Is he going to come out of there? We don't know. Could it be a system? Possibly. Catholic Church is a perfect system, perpetuated by a pope all of the time. Does he have influence in every country? Yes. Is he there in every country? Yes. Does he have, is he untouchable by other countries? Yes. He said that the economy of the Vatican is such nobody knows its net worth. Isn't that interesting? Then it goes on to, he says also he's a false Christ, which I believe he is. He is not God incarnate on the planet. He's just not. The guy's feeble, and he's in a wheelchair right now. I don't think God is feeble. But that's me. And he says, and he also identified with paganism. How do we know that? Okay, let me stop for a moment. I want to give you an overview. If you have never looked at the garment in which the Pope does his thing, you will find several very disturbing things on his hat. I call it the fish hat because it looks like a fish. On it, and on his brow, on his forehead, and on other portions of his body, and in the Vatican itself, in which you take a look at the walls, it's filled with paganism of every kind you can imagine, to the point that it's so obvious that you have to be absolutely stupid not to see it for what it is, or that you can see the inverted 666 across the head of the Pope himself. Does that make him the Antichrist? No. If I put a piece of tape here and took a felt marker and put 666, does that make me the Antichrist? No. But the point is this system the one that could be possibly doing that? Or could it be Mormonism? Same thing. The same situation. Where are they? Everywhere. And what are they doing? They're everywhere. And one of their bylaws in the Mormon church, and don't get me wrong, I'm not here bashing them. I'm just saying, if you follow Mormonism, you need to wake up and take a look at your own documents. Your own documents say it, that their plan is to have someone in high-ranking officials in offices around the world so that when Moroni, and I will call it Moroni, comes back with his horn and ushers in the new age, the new earth age or the new world age or whatever the thing is that they consider the second coming, if you will, and that happens, what's going to happen with, I'm just saying, why do they have that in their thing? That they want people to achieve these high offices so they can control the countries. That doesn't make any sense to me. What does that have to do with serving God? Nothing. It's totally pagan. So again, we're back to the same problem. Here we are. We look at these other individuals. I have a book in my library, big yellow binder on it, and it's a fascinating one. It's on Martin's book of cults. It's this thick. There's that many out there. Everything you can imagine, from Jonestown, remember that, to the situation that happened a couple of weeks ago where the Halley's Comet coming by, or I can't remember what comet it was, and all these people killed themselves. They drank the Kool-Aid. I mean, come on. There's craziness going out there. So remember, use your brain. Look at things with if you will, an astute eye. He said, study to show yourself approved, and not a immature person, but somebody with maturity. Now, saying all of that, to get back into this glossary so that we know what the terms mean. Now, apostasy. That is something we hear about a lot, and you'll see this in Revelations. You see this also in chapter 24 and 25 of the book of Matthew, where it talks about a renunciation of faith. In other words, renouncing of faith, the renouncing of religious or political belief or allegiance. So this is apostasy. In other words, people falling away from God, moving away from Him. What do we see happening today? They're leaving God. They're saying that we don't want to be part. It's the lowest participation of people of faith in the Western Hemisphere since they were taking records happened this year. So few people are going to church. I mean, we look at our own bodies since the pandemic, it's down probably half. A lot of people are watching online like you are, but my point is that what we're supposed to be doing? Just saying. Here's another term that a lot of people have a lot of challenges with. I am currently reading Mesopotamian and Babylonian letters that came from the Qumran, the Qumran. It's Q-U-M-A-N, I think, Q-U-R-M-A-N, Qumran, and it's really old, before biblical times, before anything was canon, all of that happening way back in the day, that talks about a lot of things that happened that we read about in our Bibles. Genesis theology, the creationists, the flood, the Tower of Babel, giants, watchers. I'm reading right now in First Enoch, that's actually the first chapter. It talks about the watchers tons of times. And you ask me, you're going to ask the question, oh, who's the watchers? The watchers were the council of God. God created a council in which he talks to, interacts with, and he sent them to take care of the nations, and they were supposed to oversee the nations, and they failed in their job. So Babylon is a big deal, one of the most important cities of the ancient world, whose location today is marked by a broad area of ruins just east of the Euphrates River, 56 miles south of Baghdad, Iraq. Babylon was the capital of Babylonia, and the first millennial BC. In other words, it's really old. An antiquity city profited by its location extended across the main overland trade route connecting the Persian Gulf and the Mediterranean. That's a very important piece of information. What is it telling us? It had an effect everywhere. And they found a bunch of these documents, what we call the books of Enoch. Now, don't get me wrong. Remember Enoch in Genesis. It is not Enoch that wrote these books. It's someone else. It's someone who wrote these books about Enoch. Not Enoch writing them, but somebody who wrote this about Enoch, who was and was not. So it's very interesting. And it goes on. So let's take a look at the next one. This is the most important one. Probably one of the, if you had something that you had to go to and look up in history to understand what was going on in the Roman Catholic Church, this is it. The Counter-Reformation. Counter-Reformation. This is what I was talking about, Ribera, and this situation with the Roman Catholic Church. This was the Roman Catholic response to Protestant Reformation by the Roman Catholic Church in 1545 to counter the increasing strength of Protestantism, Protestant, if you will, in Europe as a result of the Reformation. The Reformation started when Martin Luther went and put the 95 reasons why the Pope was the Antichrist and the Catholic Church was wrong. He was a priest in it, and he reformed that to become who he is today and who we know of today as Martin Luther. The founders of our faith, to be honest with you, he's the guy that started. He was the Protestant movement. Remember what does Protestant mean? Protestant. In other words, I'm protesting this. And that was the Roman Catholic theology. Now, all of that being said, understand what that means. That he was doing something to counteract what the Roman Catholic Church had control of forever. Then we go to eschatology, which I've already talked to you about, doctrines about death and the aftermath, end times thought. Futurism now is the next thing that came out. This is what Ribera started in that time period I'm talking about. That's the belief that 1,260 days and 42 months and 3.5 times of prophecy were not 1,260 years, but a literal 3.5 years. Therefore, none of the book of Revelation had any application to the Middle Ages or to the papacy, but to the future, to a period immediately prior to the second coming, hence the name futurism. They did that to cover up what was going on here. In other words, there is Revelation definitely talks about what took place between the time it was written, which would be about 100 AD until what we know even today. Chapter 19 is a breaking point in the book of Revelation where it actually begins to repeat itself to double down on what it was teaching in the beginning of those 19 chapters. Now, then it goes to another thing that we don't know. It's called historicism. The belief that the Bible predictions are being fulfilled throughout history and continue to be fulfilled today, that the book of Revelation is pre-written history of the church from the time of its writing to the future second coming of Christ. That's called historicism. This is where I lend, or I should say lean heavily to, because I believe everything is attached to the Bible is actually taken place. Because why would a book of history, listen carefully what I'm about to say, go 65 books about history and then change in Revelation to future? That doesn't make any sense. So there should be a continuation of history from beginning to end. And if you read the last chapter, last 3 verses of Revelation, it says, don't add anything to this book and don't take anything away. It says, it is what it is. So remember, a lot of the things that we keep hearing are saying things that are basically, is this true or is this not true? And then you got all these voices out there telling you all of these different things. Now here we're going to get into some things that I think I would like to do next week, because then I can take them apart. Here's some of the topics. We're going to talk about indulgences, which is the Roman Catholic Church did, Jesuits, John Calvin or Calvinism. We're going to talk about King Nebuchadnezzar. We're going to be talking about Luther's 95 Thesis, which I've been talking about all this time. We're going to talk about Martin Luther himself, the Medo-Persian situation. This is when King Cyrus is involved. It's very important because this is the one that we see in Daniel. Messianic, then we're going to talk about the papacy, Protestantism, Reformation, the temple, and then we're going to talk about the Catholic Church and meanings of Catholic and Roman Catholic, the difference. Let me throw that out for just a moment because I think it's important to catch. This is very important. And then we're going to close. I can't believe we've blown through 50 minutes. Here's the thought. Everyone that becomes a follower of Christ are Catholic. I know it's going to blow some of your minds. What does Catholic mean? Catholic means little Christ. In other words, I am going to image or mirror Jesus in my life as I walk through it. Now follow with me now. If I'm going to be a Catholic or a follower, which I am, but there's a difference when you take and add the term Roman Catholic. What that means is that the doctrines of the Roman Church that indoctrinates us in indulgences, in papacy, and all this other stuff, I am not one of those. I do not believe that the Pope is God. In fact, I don't believe that he's anywhere close to God. What you need to understand is that God is the only God. No one, nobody takes his place. There is none other. Follow with me? Does that make sense? Follow that the Roman Catholic and Catholic are two different things. This is why there's blurry between them. This is something we need to understand. I hope that you've enjoyed my time. I hope this has been interesting enough to keep your attention. And believe me, it's going to get really fun here in a minute because we're going to start taking a look at how this works, how it actually binds us together to understand that Jesus is coming really soon, and a lot sooner than a lot of people think. I'm just saying. Look around you. It is what it is. So, with that said, thanks for being with us tonight. Next week we will start at indulgences, and we will begin to break down some of these things and the understanding of what it means for history, and especially in other areas. If you would like to see my book and read a little bit about the Roman Catholic Church, you're welcome to do that. And if you're that interested, maybe what we can do, we get Miss Pam to photocopy that section. It is an incredibly interesting and very informative read, especially when it talks about the Council of Trent. What are we going to do about Martin Luther and his Protestant attitude? It's very interesting. And they had to have a Council of Trent to do that. Pretty amazing. Well, good night from Lighthouse Living Room. I hope that everything is well with you. And if you have a need or you have a question, info@lighthouselife, life.org. And I'll be happy to get back to you, especially if it's something that piques your interest. Very interesting stuff. Great stuff. And just so, disclaimer, I love Catholic people, big time, because they're just like us. They just have a need to be informed. God bless you and have a great day. May the Lord bless you. May his light shine upon you. And everywhere that you go, leave a blessing. Show somebody to Christ this week and tell your story. Love you. See you next week.